supposed to be alive and well, but when you look, the patient is as stiff as a board in the bed. So for those of us who are new, my name is Stacey Ann, and if you're already familiar with me, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for selecting this channel to watch for the next few minutes or just to be a part of the family. So as we're aware, you know, this channel, it provides you with just content. I'm just trying to bring information out there, information that is related to me, my experience, and what I can help with, you know, helping other persons to have an insight into what the expectations are or what some of their experience might be or might not be working in the hospital here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk a little bit about, you know, working in the US here as a nurse. And most of the time you'll hear me focused on the emergency room because I want it to be a case where persons who are from, you know, different countries and their transition here as international nurses, they can have an idea of what to expect working in the hospital setting. So on a typical day, I'm going to give you a general idea from the start to the finish of a day. I'm going to do them in different segments. So that way, you know, you can benefit a little bit better from it. So for example, you want to just find out information regarding what the first part of the day looks like and what the ending of your day looks like, then that information will be provided in different videos. All right, so let's get into the meat of the matter. So the shift starts at 6:45 a.m. and ends at 7:15 p.m. They advise you to go ahead and clock in exactly at 6:45, or I think it's up to like 6:45 to 6:53, and then from 7:07 to 7:15. I think there's something like that where you have to clock in so that way you're not in overtime and you're not too late. Yeah, when you reach here, you'll figure it out. All right, so when you get here, most times you'll have your charge nurse who will go ahead and do something we call a huddle. A huddle is where you have all the persons of the shift. They will meet up and come and do greetings. Not really greeting, but we kind of chit chat a little bit and we'll tell you where you'll be assigned. Some places or some facilities, they will go ahead and do the assignment from the day before. So when you're coming in the morning, you'll know definitely that tomorrow you'll be in triage, or tomorrow you'll be in pod A, the following day you'll be in psych, or, you know, depending on how they do it. But for the most part, the huddle is where you get to identify your work area for the shift and who your partner is going to be, who you're going to be working with. Will you be having a tech in that area? Do you not have a tech? Do you have housekeeping? It kind of gives a breakdown of what is available in terms of resource for you. So at the time of the start of shift, you will also be assigned, you know, your different rooms. So when you get your rooms, then you'll know what patients you'll be taking or you'll be assigned to. Sometimes you might have a case where patients are being handed off to you from the shift before because it's a case where they just arrive for the shift, or it can be a case where they've been admitted and they're now being handed off in your pod or in your rooms or in your zone so you can continue the care. So it is your responsibility now to get your bedside report. Sometimes you don't do bedside report, but we encourage, or they encourage you to do bedside report so that way you can see the patient, do your evaluation, and get your report in the meantime. The last thing you want to do is be getting a report and then only to hear that, oh, the patient is alive and well in bed, and when you go in there, the patient is in rigor mortis state. So always try to make sure you peep on your patient before your nurse leaves and make sure your patient is breathing, because you don't want it to be a case where you took a patient that is, you know, supposed to be alive and well, but when you look, the patient is as stiff as a board in the bed. So usually you'll do your shift change and you'll get your handoff. When I start my shift, I usually go ahead and, you know, from the patients that I am assigned, I will go ahead and do my triage. I'll go ahead and do my prioritization, see which patient I need to go in and see first. I always go with the patients who are like, you know, the elderly, and depending on what else is going on with the patient, then you can decide on what is most important to you, who you need to go and see first, who can wait, who hasn't been seen in a long time, you know. But I always go ahead and just lay my eyes on them just to make sure they're fine, so that way at least I can say at 8 o'clock I did receive the patients and the patients were all alive and well, and this is what they were doing, so that way I can transition my care from there. Another thing is that, you know, you want to ensure that you update your whiteboards. Whiteboards are a big thing here in America in a lot of places, because yes, it keeps your patient informed, but not all the time you're going to be able to update your whiteboard like around the clock. So I had this facility that I was working with, and it's like you're spending so much time doing the whiteboard that to me, patient care wasn't even a priority. To me, patient care wasn't a priority in terms of, you know, the frequency they want you to update the whiteboard. And it doesn't make sense to keep on updating whiteboard and you're not doing 3/4 of the things that are on the whiteboard because the place is like so busy and you haven't gotten a chance to do it. So yes, you need to update your patients, and as you go along and you see your patient, you update your patient on what is happening, so that way they can feel, they're actually aware of what's going on. They're involved in their care and somebody is actually really taking care of them, rather than them just lying in a bed for hours and not having an idea of what's happening. So the whiteboard is one thing. Another thing is the call bell. Some places you're not accustomed to call bell, like in Jamaica, we never really have call lights or call bell, but you want to ensure that you put that onto the patient's bed. Yes, sometimes it might be annoying for you because your patient will be calling every second, but if you prioritize well and you know that, oh, this patient is on Lasix, this patient is incontinent, this patient is gonna need a warm blanket, this patient, just do everything from the beginning. So even though they might have a call bell, they might not call, because guess what, you'd already put them on a incontinent pad, you've already put in an external catheter, you already put them up to pure wick, you already pull their chair close by or their table close by with their belongings, you've already given them warm blanket, you already put on a socks on them, and you already prop them up in bed. So the only thing that they need to do is hold on to the call bell at the side and only press it if there is an emergency. Which 3/4 of the time I might have my patients, I might not run in there because they're not pressing like that, because my patients are comfortable. So when you go in, you want to ensure that you observe your environment, see your patient, evaluate, and decide on what is important for you as well as for your patient, so that way you can have a smooth sailing shift. Another thing when you get in is I always like to identify where the crash carts are, because you don't want it to be a case where, as a nurse coming into the country and you hear about a rapid response or something going on and you don't know where to run and get the crash carts. I always like to identify where it is at, and sometimes I might go over and peep and look at it, but I always try to make sure that I'm familiar with the location and make sure that it is actually checked off. Another thing is that we have this thing called a Lucas machine, and what that does is help you with your chest compression whenever you're having a code. So you want to also ensure that it is actually charged up and it is working, because you don't want it to be a case where at the end of the day, when a patient code on you, you're going to be there pumping their chest for the entire time. Your shoulders going pop out, your shoulders going pain you. So if you can identify where the Lucas is and make sure that it is, ready in the event that there is any emergency in the department, you can have it readily available to you and other persons. All right, so I always do that. Another thing is, in my individual rooms, I will ensure that, my wall suctions are working. Go in, turn on your wall suction. Sometimes people might think that, you're just too much, but you're doing it because in your mind you don't want it to be a case where something happens and then you're going to rush to the wall suction to get patient connected and you can't connect the patient because there's not an outlet or something is broken. So I always go in and check to make sure that's working, and that way, if in the event that I need to do anything, it's there. I would encourage you to go ahead and check your oxygen outlet, just to make sure that oxygen is actually flowing, because you don't want it to be a case where a patient codes and when you look, you can't really hook the patient to anything because there is not anything called a Christmas tree. There is not anything that is working there, or there is no oxygen coming out of the wall itself. So you want to ensure that you check that to make sure oxygen is flowing well. You want to check it to ensure that the wall suction is working. Another thing is that, all the rooms have cardiac monitors. So you want to ensure that your cardiac monitors are working. You have the different sections to attach to the cardiac monitor. So you want to ensure that you have the ones for the EKG leads. You want to have the ones for the blood pressure machine. You want to have the ones for your pulse oximeter. So not all the time there might be an extension for the arterial line attached to your cardiac monitor, but you must know where the arterial line is going to be connected. You must know where you find the arterial line whenever you are ready to connect the patient to the machine. All right, so I always ensure that. And then, as I say, you want to ensure that the cardiac monitor is working. The other thing is that is very important that I didn't touch on with the crash cart was the defibrillator. You want to ensure that your defibrillator is working well, and you want to ensure that you understand how to use it. You need to understand how to use it. If it is your patient, most of the time you're the primary nurse. If it's not your patient, sometimes you'll be assigned to using the defibrillator. Sometimes you'll be assigned to, the crash cart itself. Sometimes you'll be assigned to medication. So to ensure that you are familiar with those things. Get familiar with the defibrillator and start read upon them from before. So most hospitals use the same defibrillator, the brand itself. So when you go to other facilities, it might be easier for you to use because you're familiar with it. Another thing is that you might not have pumps in all your rooms. Some hospitals, they do have pumps in all their rooms, and the pumps I'm talking about is your IV pumps. They have the Aleris brand, and they have some other brands I can't remember, but the Aleris brand is pretty decent to use. A lot of hospitals use it. You can look it up. There is a lot of information you can get online regarding it, but when you get here, they will show you. But for me, priority is always going to be that I have at least one, and that is going to be because I want it to be a case where if I have a critically ill patient and they need to be on a drip, I know that I have one in at least one of my rooms. When you get here as well, the emergency room, the nurses are usually staffed with 4-to-1 patient ratio. Sometimes it might go to 5. Sometimes it varies a lot because, depending on what's going on. Because if you have ICU patients and you have 2 ICU patients working with, you can't really take 3, 4, 5 patients, even though some places will go along and tell you that, oh yeah, we don't have any staff or whatever, so you're going to have to take care of them. Just remember that, you have a license that you're working with, and if something happens to any of those patients while you're there, it's going to be on your hand. So what I encourage persons to do is, if you're at any point going to be doing something that you're not comfortable with. So for example, you go in one day and you get 4 patients that are ICU status. You evaluate your patient and you see that the patients are really ill. I would encourage you to go ahead and, say to your charge nurse or your manager that, you're not comfortable taking care of these patients because everybody is ICU status. This one is hypotensive. This one is hypotensive. This one is intubated, and this one is getting critical. So you want to ensure that you identify that your patients are critically ill or in a status where they need extra supervision or they need extra care, attention around the clock while you're there. So not because you have 4 rooms assigned to, it doesn't necessarily mean that for the 4 patients that you have, if they meet criteria for ICU, it doesn't mean that you're responsible for them. Let your charge nurses know so that way they can assign other persons to get in at least 2 of those patients off your hand, or give you at least 2 ICU patients and another patient that is not going to be, requiring you to be taking care of them or peeping in on them around the clock, like every second or every 15 minutes. Because as I say, when you're in that situation, if you don't speak up, they won't know. They're going to feel as though you're comfortable with it. So you must know where your comfort level is, and then from there you decide. Ensure that you have supplies to work with. Always ensure that I have incontinent pads. So the incontinent pads are my best friend in the hospital, because all my patients, especially my elderly folks, they're the ones who go on an incontinent pad. If you don't put a patient on an incontinent pads, or we call it chucks, sometimes if you don't put the patient on one, it might just give you a lot of work to do later on. So identify your patients, who are coming to your room and what you need, and then from there you go ahead and plan, so that way it lessens the amount of work you might have to do as you get throughout your shift. And sometimes your shift is so busy and you get so fatigued and you get so like you're working so hard around the clock, you don't even realize that you're getting burnt out. And then by the time this patient poops or pee over that side, you don't have anybody to help you to clean it, or there's so many things that can be going on. So if you have the incontinent pads on, it makes your life a little bit easier, because then you'll be able to literally roll the patient by yourself, push underneath. And even if it's a case where, the patient is back on a dry bed linen without an incontinence pad, it's better than having the patient lying on an incontinence pad for hours and not getting any assistance to clean up the patient properly. Another thing that I do is, when I have patients coming in to my rooms from, so for example, they have this thing called pre-arrival, where they'll put the patient's information on the tracker to say that X is coming to room Y. Room Y is your patient, and you want to know that, you're well prepared. What I normally do is, as I say, I'm very inquisitive. So if they don't put much information on the board regarding the patient, I'm going to go and ask the charge nurse, what is that patient's complaint. I'm going to go and ask how old is the patient, because all of these are things I'm thinking about that is going to help with me, prepping my room for the patient. So the patient is an elderly, he's automatically going to go on an incontinence pad, because if you're elderly, there's a high possibility that you're going to be on Lasix, you're going to pee, and all of them things there that, I'm not going to be able to do that fast. So I usually put my patients on an incontinence pad once they come in and they're an elderly person, or if it's a trauma patient, or if it is a bedridden patient, I normally go ahead and put incontinence pad on those beds. I always look at the complaint and I always look at the age, because those are two things that are going to help me to go ahead and start preparation for that patient before the patient gets there. So when I look at the age is going to tell me whether or not this person is ambulatory, whether or not this person is going to be peeing on the bed, or this is going to tell me what is it that the doctor is possibly going to work up this patient for. And then the other thing I'm going to be looking at is the fact that, the patient is having this complaint. So is the patient short of breath? Is the patient having abdominal pain? Then I will be able to get the necessary supplies to go ahead and start the planning. Because if it's a shortness of breath, if it's an elderly person who is confused, I'm going to go ahead and start getting things for a sepsis workup. If it is an abdominal pain and it is a patient that is, in the 30s, the patient is ambulatory, I don't need an incontinence pad to put on the bed, because I'm not expecting a 30-year-old to have an incontinence, and an abdominal pain, I'm not expecting that much of a workup to be done where it's going to soil my bed or, going to cause other things to be happening. So with the abdominal pain, I know definitely the patient is going to get a lot of blood work. The patient is going to get a CT scan. We're going to need urine, and we're going to probably do fluids and medications, and that's it. Versus an abdominal pain in an elderly person is going to be incontinent. You have to go ahead and do those extra planning for the patient to make your life a little bit better. I ensure that I have nasal cannulas in the room. I have extra blood pressure cuffs. I have extra mask for oxygen. I have a Yanka suction. So those are just things that you would normally have in your room, so that way, in the event that when your patient gets there and you want to put on a little bit of oxygen, you should be able to have that. Most of the rooms are set up the same, so when you're prepping your room, you're prepping your room and you're prepping the same thing in the other room, so it's not going to be that bad. But when I get there in the mornings, that's the first thing I do. And even if I have patients in those rooms, I try to check to ensure that, I have enough supplies. So I go ahead and top up. It's your responsibility to top up as you go along, so that way you don't feel as though by the time it reaches 11 o'clock, you're out of supply and the shift is just starting to get busy, and then you're feeling as though you're running behind time with certain things. So if you go ahead and do top up on whatever the nurse had handed off to you from before, then it will work out better for you as a nurse, because as I say, you're not going to be out of supply in the start of the shift or the middle of the shift when it has gotten so busy. Another thing is that, while you're there, not all the time, as I say, you will have text available. Sometimes you might have text, sometimes you might not have text. It depends on the facility you're working at, and it depends on the resource that they have. Some of your texts are able to do certain things, some are not able to do certain things. So just ensure that you know what they're able to do, and ensure that you delegate. Other times, nurses might send off things, or texts might send off things. It might not get over to the lab in time, or something happened and the sample just disappear. So you want to ensure that if you realize that the sample is taking over 1 hour for it to be resulted, just call the lab and just find out from there what is the status on this, and that will kind of help with you getting your patients going throughout the shift. So you want to identify what orders are in progress for the patient and what needs to be done. So at the start of the shift, I would encourage you to just go ahead, go through the orders that they have been placed for the patient, and ensure that everything else that wasn't done from the initial shift is now being completed at your start of the shift. And once you're able to do that, then it will give you a better time management as you go along. It will give you a better flow of your time as you go along, because if you know that all these 2 patients in your rooms are caught up, then you can easily move on to the next and the next, and so your work in the emergency room will be a little bit more easygoing, and everybody will be fine. The patient will be fine, not complaining. You will be okay, not complaining. The doctors will not be complaining. And so you might have a wonderful shift from there. Sometimes it gets chaotic, but as you go along and, you know, you understand certain things, it will get better. So I'm going to tell you how I ride and whistle in the emergency room to get my patients seen and to have a wonderful shift, not something that is going to feel like it's stressing me or it's tiresome or anything like that. So I'm going to show you how I go about with triaging and making sure that I'm documenting, making use of the support that I have at the time of the patient arrival to the emergency room. And so that usually helps me out a lot, because if you have good time management, then your shift will go perfectly fine. All right. So until then, thank you so much for tuning in. And if you have any questions or any concerns, you know, please remember to go ahead and leave them in the comment box below. And please remember to subscribe, tell your friends about it. You know, anybody that is interested in hearing stories or just wanting to hear what it is like working in the hospitals here in the US, or just anything that is related to nursing, then I would encourage you to tell them about the channel so we can actually build on it, share insights on everything that is related to nursing. All right. Until then, thank you so much for tuning in, and I do hope that you will have a wonderful day. Bye.